What you are about to hear is drawn entirely from public records. Senate hearings, declassified government documents, court filings, testimony given under oath by the scientists and administrators who ran the programs and the survivors who lived through them. None of it is speculation, all of it happened. In the years following the Second World War, the United States government made a quiet but consequential decision. It decided that the pursuit of national security justified conducting experiments on human beings who had not agreed to participate, had not been told they were participating, and in many cases would never know what had been done to them. That decision was not made by a single person in a single moment. It was the product of dozens of institutional choices spread across multiple agencies, multiple decades, and multiple countries. What united them was a common premise: that American citizens, soldiers, prisoners, mental patients, and the general public could be used as experimental material in service of larger strategic objectives. The programs that followed that premise were diverse in their methods and their stated purposes, but they shared a structural feature that distinguished them from legitimate scientific research. They were deliberately hidden from the people who were being tested. The reason for that secrecy was not procedural or logistical. It was that the experiments required participants who did not know they were participating, because consent would have made the experimental conditions impossible to achieve. The Cold War provided the institutional logic. American military and intelligence planners became convinced in the late 1940s and early 1950s that the Soviet Union had developed, or was developing, techniques for altering human behavior on a scale and with a reliability that gave them a strategic advantage. American prisoners of war returning from Korea behaved in ways that seemed inexplicable to the people who had known them before capture. Some publicly denounced American policy. Some made statements that appeared to reflect beliefs they had never previously held. Military analysts and intelligence officers interpreted this as evidence that the enemy had cracked something fundamental about the human mind, and that the United States needed to crack it too. That interpretation produced a massive, coordinated, and largely secret research effort. The CIA's contribution was called MKUltra, and it ran from 1953 until at least 1973. But it was not alone. The Army, the Navy, and the Air Force each ran parallel programs examining behavioral modification, chemical incapacitation, and interrogation enhancement. The Atomic Energy Commission funded research on the effects of radiation exposure on human subjects, including prisoners at Oregon and Washington state penitentiaries who were paid small amounts of money to have their testicles irradiated so that researchers could measure chromosomal damage. Patients at university hospitals were injected with plutonium without their knowledge. Soldiers were marched through nuclear test sites to study the psychological effects of proximity to atomic detonations. In each case, the subjects were not told the true nature of what was being done to them. The radiation experiments are worth dwelling on because they occurred in a context that makes their ethical character unmistakable. The Nuremberg Code, written in 1947, in direct response to the medical experiments conducted by Nazi physicians on concentration camp prisoners, established voluntary consent as the absolute first requirement of any legitimate human experimentation. American doctors and American government officials were deeply familiar with that code. Many of them had testified at the Nuremberg trials. The decision to fund and conduct non-consensual experiments on American civilians and prisoners in the years immediately following Nuremberg was not a product of ignorance. It was a product of a deliberate judgment that the ethical requirements that applied to everyone else did not apply to programs deemed essential to national security. The consequences of that judgment were borne almost entirely by the people who were used. At hospitals run by researchers receiving federal grants, cancer patients were injected with radioactive isotopes so physicians could track metabolic pathways. Some of those patients had been told they were receiving treatments that might help them. Some received nothing but harm. At the Willowbrook State School in New York, children with intellectual disabilities were deliberately infected with hepatitis as part of a study on the disease's transmission and progression. Researchers argued that the children would likely have been exposed to hepatitis anyway given the conditions at the institution, and that parental consent had been obtained, a claim disputed by the families who argued that consent had been conditioned on their children's admission to an already overcrowded facility. In Tuskegee, Alabama, the Public Health Service allowed 400 black men with syphilis to go untreated for 40 years while telling them they were receiving care, in order to study the disease's natural progression. When penicillin became widely available in the 1940s and the men could have been cured, the study continued. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study, perhaps more than any other single program, illustrates the intersection of institutional indifference and structural vulnerability that made these experiments possible. The men who participated were poor, black, and rural, in a period when the American medical establishment did not extend the same standard of care to them that it extended to other populations. They trusted the physicians who told them they were receiving treatment for bad blood. That trust was exploited for 4 decades. The study was not shut down by government oversight. It was exposed in 1972 by a journalist who obtained documents and took them to the press. The government's response was to call it a tragedy and settle the resulting lawsuits. No one was prosecuted. No one lost a medical license. The pattern repeated itself with the mind control programs. MKUltra was not discovered through government accountability mechanisms. It was exposed by a Freedom of Information Act request that turned up a set of financial records that had survived a director-ordered document purge. The records revealed that the CIA had contracted with universities, hospitals, and research institutions across the country to conduct experiments involving LSD, electroconvulsive therapy, sleep deprivation, hypnosis, and combinations of drugs and psychological stress on subjects who had not consented. The most extreme experiments were conducted in Canada by a psychiatrist who used massive doses of electroshock and weeks of drug-induced sleep to erase patients' personalities and attempt to rebuild them from scratch. His patients came to him seeking treatment for depression and anxiety, some left unable to remember their own names. The 1977 Senate hearings that followed the discovery of the surviving MKUltra files were remarkable for what they confirmed and for what they failed to produce. A sitting CIA director sat before Congress and acknowledged that his agency had conducted secret experiments on unwitting American citizens for 20 years, had violated established principles of medical ethics, and had destroyed the records of what it had done. The political consequences were limited. The CIA survived. No senior official was criminally charged. The scientist who had designed and administered the program retired quietly and was never prosecuted. The victims and their families were left to seek compensation through civil courts, where many found that statutes of limitations had already expired by the time the program's existence became public. What the documentary record shows, across MKUltra and the radiation trials and Tuskegee, and the dozens of lesser-known programs that operated in the same years, is not a series of isolated failures of individual ethics. It is the product of an institutional culture that had decided certain populations could be used as means to ends, that the normal ethical requirements for human research could be suspended when the people being used were deemed to lack the social or political standing that those requirements were designed to protect, and that secrecy was an acceptable substitute for consent. The fact that these programs were secret is not incidental to their character. It is the most accurate possible evidence of the judgment made by the people who ran them, that what they were doing could not survive scrutiny, and that ensuring it would not be scrutinized was preferable to stopping. The documents that survived these programs are public. They are held at the National Archives, at the National Security Archive at George Washington University, and in the court records of the lawsuits that followed their exposure. They are accessible to anyone who looks for them. They tell a story not about exceptional circumstances or rogue actors, but about what institutions do when oversight is insufficient, when the populations being used lack political power, and when the people making decisions have convinced themselves that the strategic stakes justify setting ordinary moral limits aside. That belief does not belong to any particular era. It is available in any period to any institution that finds itself convinced that the circumstances are extraordinary enough and the oversight weak enough to make it possible. What the historical record offers is not comfort. It is a detailed account of what happened.